All right. Good afternoon. I think we are now in week three of what promises to be an 18-month roller coaster that India and all enterprises who operate in India, either Indian businesses or even global businesses, have embarked on. And while there have been no major surprises between the draft rules and the rules that got notified a few weeks back, what we wanted to do today was to walk through some of those key components that deserve immediate attention from enterprises. There's a post DPDP world that we've now ushered in. This speaks of notices, purpose-based consent, rights fulfillment, retentions, deletion chains, vendor governance. What we'll do today is we'll double click into organizational and technical reengineering that is needed to build what we'd like to call a truly consent-based governance architecture. We'll outline what teams should start doing right away and reflect on early lessons that we may have from the panelists' experience of having embarked on this either earlier or from their current work at their organizations. Thank you for joining us. We'll jump in. I'll quickly introduce the panel and then we'll get going. So for everyone, I am Nikhil. I lead product and growth at Privy by IDfy, India's leading privacy and data governance platform, powering DPDPA compliance and beyond. Over last 3+ years, I've personally been involved in building Privy's enterprise capabilities and worked closely with many of India's early movers in their privacy transformation journeys, giving me a front row view into what truly works at scale. Before this, in my previous life, I was also a consultant working with EY, an alumnus of ISB, Indian School of Business, and also a DSCI certified data protection officer. Joining me is Sarita Padmini. She is a senior director for cybersecurity and data governance at Protiviti India, where she leads privacy transformation programs for large enterprises. She has played a pivotal role in India's most complex national digital initiatives, such as Ayushman Bharat, ensuring privacy by design, securing data flows, and responsible governance at scale. Widely recognized for advancing women in tech, Sarita is known for helping organizations build trust through strong consent governance, transparent processing practices, and resilient privacy operating models. Thank you, Sarita, for joining us today.
Thanks, Nikhil, for having me here. Look forward.
We also have Francis. Francis currently works as head of privacy and DPO at Narayana Health, where he leads the enterprise privacy program across their healthcare insurance operations. He brings across 20 years of experience in data privacy, risk compliance, and quality assurance across consulting, banking, and financial services sectors. He has worked with organizations like State Bank of India, Grant Thornton, and Encore Capital Group in various capacities. Francis also holds multiple certifications, including the IAPP's CIPPE, CIPM, DCPLA, and ISO auditor credentials. Thank you, Francis, for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right. With that, I think we'll get going. The first segment which I wanted to sort of touch upon was with the rules now in. We've had about 2 to 3 weeks to really dissect sort of each of this line by line. I wanted to begin with Sarita. Sarita, in a recent state of privacy report that Protiviti has published, it seems that barely 24% of organizations feel prepared to be able to manage privacy concerns given the sort of emergence of technologies, a bunch of AI ML work that continues in organizations. And if you marry that to compliance with the DPDP Act, that number seems low. In your experience, what do you think are the key gaps that exist today in an organization's privacy posture if you were to look at compliance or adherence to the DPDP Act and the rules that have just come out?
Yeah, Nikhil, you absolutely, brought up a great discussion. When we conducted this survey 1 year ago, we were awaiting for the rules. We really were very surprised to this seeing this number of percentile on the response part, right? So we understood that definitely most of the organization have the processes on paper, but they are very limited to the operational view. Okay, there are key gaps which is still existing in the environment, And what we have seen, if we just talk about the key gaps, so we have observed that various discussion, in fact, other than the survey, we are interacting day to day with our clients and organization to understand their challenges. So, moreover, you see everywhere there is a concern around the data inventory, right? Everybody, they are not aware where all the data exists. That can be with many shadow sources. Okay, so it can be your analytics or it can be somewhere with your vendors. Nobody has that visibility right now. Where data inventory is one key concern that we see. Even if you talk about the GDPR examples, GDPR also put a fine on the same for unknown data copies, right, after acquisitions. So that's also there. And we have seen weak consent traceability. So that is again there. People have captured the consent from one channel and that is not able to link to the backend for the processing or the retention logic. So that's another gap which you would see. Retention and deletion again, that's again a key gap that we are seeing. People are retaining the data, but let's say if somebody is raising the request for the deletion of the data, how to address that challenge. So that's again there. You can talk about the fragmented vendor governance that is existing in the environment, and many audit trails, lack of audit trails, KPI measurements we can talk about. These are the couple of key gaps that we are absorbing. And I would suggest that privacy has to be part of their operational program and it has to be instrumental across the organization.
No, absolutely, Sarita. I think very pertinent points. You spoke of vendor governance and vendor risk. You also spoke of the side of notice, as well as data practices of shadow data. I think those are three dimensions that really sort of came through. I will move to Francis, and just reading the rules, I'd like to call out just two rules in particular. I think there's a rule 3 on notice design, and there's a rule 9, I think, that speaks of retention of data for a year long period beyond when the purpose has been met, right? And just wanted to get your take on this, Francis, based on obviously you've sort of approached this problem from both a data privacy and protection lens, but also from a larger regulatory sort of experience that you bring to the table. If enterprises are to now obviously re-engineer the way that they are dealing with the data and these rules sort of superimpose, where do you see the sort of gaps or what breaking down when sort of somebody reads this and tries to implement either a process intervention or a change in an organization, particularly for notice and the data retention sort of rules that come through? So would like to get to know your take, Francis.
Yeah, so I feel that there are a few things here that we need to talk about, right? The first one is about crafting a privacy notice. While the rules and the DPDPA calls out that it should be plain and understandable and simple and and all that, right? It is difficult, right? For some of them, it'll be really difficult to transparently disclose such data handling practices. Nevertheless, it is important that the transparency is maintained. Crafting a privacy notice is you'll need to look at it from the reader's standpoint. The user who's going to go through this notice uh, needs to be able to understand. Excuse me, needs to be able to understand what's written in the document, how his or her data is going to be handled by the data fiduciary, what are his or her rights going to be, how is that going to be exercised, do I have any modes or methods to exercise those rights through the privacy notice itself, right? So all that information coming into that one document that needs to be independent from any other documents or any other references is not easy. Making it user friendly and understandable to the user is another challenge. The other challenge that I see with especially the privacy notice bit is consistency across platforms, right? an organization data fiduciary may have multiple platforms where privacy notices will need to be will need to be implemented, will need to be added, right? Now maintaining a uniform privacy notice across platforms may be a challenge. If it's about privacy notice across regions, that can also become a challenge. Do we create separate privacy policies or notices for different jurisdictions, and one for India? How does that all come together? Is a question that the fiduciaries will have to ask. The other thing also is these privacy notices needs to be up to date, right? Any new processes, any new processes or any new platforms or any new initiatives, right, could result in a change in these privacy notices. How do you keep that governance mechanism going to review these notices frequently? Frequency can be annual, monthly, or whenever it is required. That also brings up a challenge of versioning. Was consent obtained for a particular version of the change or the privacy notice or not? All that will create some complexities. The other part about retention and deletion, right? See, the retention and deletion, at least for India only, or operate companies operating only in India, is used to be like housekeeping tasks, right? Okay, we keep the data, for whatever time period. It's okay. Just companies were, or fiduciaries were, not ready to or prepared to let go of that data. Now, under the DPDP regime, they become legal obligations, right? Enforceable through very large penalties, investigations from the Data Protection Board, potential seizing of data processing, etc. So all these become quite significant change in there will need to be significant changes in data architectures, workflows, documentation practices, etc. Right. Again, with these retention and deletion requirements, the importance of keeping the data accurate can also present a challenge. It may lead to technical difficulties. These because these are necessary for legal compliance, there are operational complexities if fiduciaries fail to implement such proper data retention policies. So all these things have to be kept in mind. There are risks involved with changing some of these nuances within an organization's architecture, and that is what will need to be fiduciaries will need to be wary of, right? So yeah, all in all, I think a significant change in how deletion and retention and notices, quite simple when we say it needs to be plain and understandable, but not quite so when you sit down to craft it.
Yeah. No, I think these are both points that I resonate with. Obviously, now having done this at a few places, you realize the complexity. I think the aspects of rule, I mean, Section 5 of the Act and Rule 3, easy to read, but when you try to get on board and get this going, I think there's a lot of things to consider. Obviously, both being sort of one compliant to the sort of letter and spirit of the law, and then two ensuring there is great customer experience for the customer, you ensure that there's no churn, so on and so forth, right? Very pertinent point made on versioning as well, because you want to at any point of time already know for what version of the notice you gave consent, and if that has changed, it's great that if there's a mechanism by which you could be informed and then you could give some express consent on top, which could just be a delta, is the way that I also see it.
Especially, I'm sorry, I'm adding just one bit
Yes.
again, especially in complex industries like complex services like banking, right? Hundreds and thousands of processes, right?
Right.
It becomes difficult to you know uh, bring all of that into a single notice,
Sure.
or even creating separate notices, right? That becomes
Right.
complicated.
Right. I just want to add, obviously, the need to move away from a single checkbox link privacy policy sort of modus operandi, I think, is changing with the advent of the act. We are being forced to think purpose forward. So PII element that may be either collected, processed, deleted, times the purpose is what the act really forces us to sort of think about, right? I'll move on to our next sort of segment that we had, and we know that this journey will be 18 months long and even more for most enterprises. I think it is always great to sort of get going on a positive note to potentially do some quick wins and do this both, I think, from an internal facing as well as an external signaling perspective, right? And that's at least what I believe, which is one, how do you look at this internally, get the right sources, get the right people working on this and sort of enabled? And two is how can you signal this back to your customer base from a perspective to say that you really take this seriously and you've embarked on this journey. So on that note, Sarita, my question to you would be if and this most organizations attending today and the audience from what we've gathered have barely just begun this journey, and they may not already have a structured way of thinking about this. So if you could guide the audience on some sort of a minimal viable sort of governance kit that they must build, right, in the first 90, 120 odd days, what are things that they should be focusing on so that they can sort of meet that 18-month deadline?
Oh yeah, because definitely, Nikhil. So that is something every organization needs to focus on, rather, getting into a kiosk of this 18 months journey. Okay, they have to plan it short. There has to be a short-term plan or a minimum viable guidance kit that we are talking about. So if we call it, let me say, talk about the first 90 days. Okay, how should we divide our entire 90 days? First, we should think about the foundation. Okay, and when we are talking about the foundation, where should we begin? We have to first begin with the identification of the data elements, which is lying in our environment. That's a first step, right? As I spoke earlier, even data inventory is something very crucial, and that organization needs to start doing that. It can be done by connecting with their respective business units and understanding the data, because they know there are data which is lying in their environment. They just need to bring it into one page and they need to collect it, to look at it in a very top level lenses, that okay, this is what the risk that where we are sitting on, right? Then they have to work on knowing the data flows around. And we spoke about, Francis also mentioned about the purpose. You also emphasized on the criticality of the purpose, because if we understand the act pretty well, or it is entirely centered around the purpose. Okay, so why we are collecting the data? If the purpose is clear and we are able to sit on top of this purpose, then definitely we are going to address both the technical challenges and the lawful challenges that is going to come in our way, right? So that purpose has to be defined, well defined, and it has to be understood as a DNA of the organization. Why are they collecting the data or processing the data further? So that purpose, they need to do a ring fencing, which is going to protect them ahead, right? So once that has been done, they need to talk about the documentation journey. They should start about it. Okay, I'm not bringing the establishment of DPO on the first 30 days, because this can be done irrespective of that. Okay, by the time the organization is getting hold of the responsible person. Okay, so foundation is the first. Identify your ecosystem. Apart from the data element, ecosystem, knowing your partners. Okay, that's again is a very critical part, which covers your vendors, which covers your subsidiaries, wherever your data is flowing down, from where you are collecting. So everything you need to list it down. So entire ecosystem partner, you have to, I'm not using the terminology only of vendor. You have to list down the entire ecosystem partners. Okay, to know that this has to be your first 30 days journey. Then next 30 days, you have to focus on operationalizing from a policy and documentation standpoint. There, probably the organization should start thinking of establishing a privacy committee, which can be, pull into as an expert advisory or give their opinion or take a decision around, okay, how do they should, move ahead with the journey. All the documentation readiness they should work on. Okay, well, I'm sure a lot of us might have heard about the terminology ROPA and DFT and all. So these are nothing but these are the journey to achieve the compliance in the organization. Okay, so that's what gonna help the organization to understand their processing activities and the entire data flow diagram where they need to put the compliance and what is the risk they associated with the organization, right? So this journey by all these entire 60 days, so this operationalization, creating the awareness, okay, the basic awareness within the organization. Okay, we are collecting the data elements. So there is an act which is a DPDP Act. These are the obligations that the organizations need to meet. So those type of discussion they should start doing that, bringing it part of the policy. Then the third stage, which is another 30 days, which is you should focus on, bringing it on a one pager, evaluating your technology solution partner, because definitely it is uh, it cannot be achieved without a technology. A lot of time we use this terminology when we are talking about with any practitioner or the organization, techno-legal combination, right? So it's not a purely legal, it's not a purely technical. So there has to be a combination that the organization along with the business objective, that the one we are talking about the purpose, right? All these have to come together. Then the organization need to build a roadmap. Okay, now this is a 3 months gun. Okay, so another, as even Nikhil said, 3 weeks are already gone together, right? So let's say 4 months we have taken just like that. So how we are gonna bring the partner or build the capabilities to develop the entire consent framework, how the retention, because there is a longer retention that DPDP is enforcing from a log retention standpoint, okay, which is not the usual practice that we have seen across the sectoral regulation that we already have in our country. Okay, so for that also organization needs to build a capacity. For that they need to plan around the entire framework and the concept of the enabling the data principle with the revocation of the consent and the post action that the organization are liable to do the post revocation of the consent, because today is again the theme that we are talking about is a new consent and the governance architecture. So let's understand that's a very critical piece, because now there is an introduction of the consent manager as well, which was long awaited terminology. What is the role of that consent manager? We are going to discuss in depth. So that's something I think by the time you reach 90 days, those integration and how should we, the organization should proceed ahead, apart from the documentation part, that clarity should be in place as in form of a roadmap. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think very pertinent points made, Sarita. Obviously, the first 90 days, they need to be sort of well planned. There are interventions across people, like we said, maybe appointing the DPO could be delayed, but getting the right team in place to be able to operationalize this, fixing our data inventory in parallel, thinking about this concept of a ROPA, and also in parallel doing really figuring out how to sort of do this in technology. I think uh, partly the problem gets solved when you try to do something manually, but if you've sort of thought this through from the beginning and use technology as an enabler, it becomes easier as you sort of continue forward. Francis, just a similar question to you, and we'll move on to the next segment. And I'd ask the flip of this question to say, looks like there are a few things which are basic. Get a vendor inventory in place, understand what your notice should look like, build out your ROPA. But are there things that people should avoid doing? This is almost like if I look at the large checklist of this, what has to be done in the 18 months, there are things obviously that you may want to do later and not want to start with. So based on obviously your experience across some sectors, are there things that people should avoid? Because I think again, for the audience on this call, a lot of the room is still stuck between, okay, now my time, countdown is started, but if there's great guidance to avoid some things now, maybe do it later. Over to you, Francis.
Okay, so uh, that's an interesting question there, right? I think first thing to avoid is to procrastinate, right? 18 months may look like a long time, but get to work. We've waited 2 years. I'm hoping you would have, fiduciaries would have done some amount of work to get things in line, as at least to understand data flows, or create records of processing activities, or even look at your data architecture, right? And what identify what changes has to be made in order to comply with these new rules, right? What not to do, you know, or I would take a look at some of the nuances, right, of these requirements, right? There may be some hidden aspects to it. When we already talked about, the notices, right? Make sure that these notices are reviewed in detail, right? Don't try and make it as realistic or as accurate as possible, right? Do not leave out these simple quick wins, so to say, right? One of the things that I've also tried to expedite is, one of the quick wins is, maybe have a cookie management policy in place, right? Or a preference manager in place. That's a quick win, right? It can only be done with technology, and it's not a long drawn process, right? It can be done in, depending on the organization, in a month or two. So that's a quick win, right? So identify your quick wins, and don't ignore it. There may be some things that you may want to take, delay a little bit, like, um, while you implement these privacy notices, it also talks about providing a facility to exercise your rights, right? You may want to create these policies, maybe not implement it immediately, right? Get it approved tomorrow and immediately apply when your supporting processes are not in place. That's something that can be done, right? Again, not procrastinating again. Although you have 18 months, hire a DPO, right? Don't delay that decision, right? See, the compliances need focus. That strategic leadership will help organizations comply. What I always say about implementing any compliance programs in an organization is to have top management bought into the entire gamut of things, right? Um, um, don't think about costs too much. That's also one thing that you need to avoid doing, right? You have to invest in technologies that will help you comply. If you basically look at these costs, right? These are, there's no point of looking at these costs, right? You have to comply, right? If you look at how you need to be able to sell these to the top management, there is ROI, right? Avoid penalties. Data minimization may give you some more space, or would require less storage space, right? That's cost right there. So having all these conversations with top management will help you get those budgets, get those technologies or tools into the organization, and help with these compliances. Not to be taken lightly. Don't think that 18 months is going to get longer if the data protection board is not created within the next 12 months, or anything like that, right? I hear a lot of those comments, but don't pay heed to that. It's important also for customer trust, or your customers will need to be able to come back to you again, trusting that their data is secure and is being handled in an appropriate manner.
Yeah, thanks, Francis. Just to your point, I think obviously the role of a DPO becomes even more important across. I think it's probably one of the hottest roles available today, both skill set wise. Obviously, you need somebody who can straddle between legal and technology. And the other point I take away from what you said is maybe you don't need to do everything to the nth level of maturity. You may begin, let's say, when I begin saying my data principal rights, maybe you begin with the sort of maturity level baseline to say, can I have something in place where customers could come and request for their rights, right? And then to the slightly more mature level over time, you could sort of think of this more from a self-serve capability. And I think that's what you're also saying. So I think thank you. What we will move on to now and is our next question sort of and we'll focus a little bit on consent, the architecture that somebody needs to think through as they sort of think about building this new sort of trust-based ecosystem. And Sarita, I'll come back to you. Uh, if I were to, I think there are 2 points, right? There is a obviously a BRD that gets spoken of, which speaks of consent management systems, and I think we'll come back to that definition with Francis. But the idea around thinking of consent not just from collection, but rather that entire life cycle is where the work really needs to happen, right? And if I just speak of collection, seems like the Indian nuance, right, is languages, it's various form factors of collecting this consent. Even if the interaction may not be digital, there's going to be data that get digitized at some point, right? So we live in a world where there's sort of, I would say, most interactions are DIY digital, some are basically assisted, and some are completely physical in today's across sectors. So on that note, if you had to help one of your customers really think through how to architect consent on the basis of just collection and collection points, right? What would the right strategy, or what are sort of dimensions that they should explore?
See, basically, absolutely, when you are talking about the consent, entire management of the consent, or when we are architecting the entire consent manager for any organization, so we have to look at it in every form, right? When we are talking about the physical form and or the digital form, okay, both the senses, that is where we are collecting, at what all purpose we are collecting. Because so if you talk about, Francis can also add on to the use cases when we talk about any healthcare ecosystem, right? So at the various stages for the similar patient, they need to collect the consent, okay? So, for in case of IP, they need to collect the consent. Okay, during the registration, they need to collect the, consent. And when we talk about again in the banking again, okay, so when we onboard somebody, that also you need to collect a different consent. For transaction level, you need to collect a different consent. So everywhere across there are different consent check post which is there, and for a different purpose altogether. So how well we are defining the entire purpose and mapping it to the consent, okay? So that block by block processing is very important when we are designing it. Okay, the entire versioning that also Francis spoke about, about the versioning issues that the organization is facing, that has to be very well structured, and it has to be from a notices standpoint, and it is ties back to the consent again. Okay, so that's again very critical step. So the intake, the mapping, enforcement, okay, these three has to be very well coupled. And apart from that, how we are producing, it's not about the rights of the data principle only, but from everybody's standpoint, how we are reconciling this entire three checkpoints, okay, the audit, or how we are establishing the mechanism to look at the entire cycle from a life cycle standpoint, okay, that governance system, building that complex architecture is very, very important. For that again, I think Nikhil, you may also add on to that, because another component, having that consent manager, the thought process behind the GUI has, in order to have the independent consent manager, is all about building a strong governance system, right? So it's something where we can keep the index separate, and the management which has been done, and these two are shaking their hand in order to building a strong and robust system. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Sarita. I think thank you for sort of breaking this down. Obviously, I think we spoke of collection and various sort of modalities and channels. And to with your request, I'll pose the question to Francis, and I'll also love to chime in later. Francis, the question is obviously there's a lot of, I would say, misconceptions. People obviously have read and interpreted the act and the rules in various capacities. There is one key question that people have in mind. I think that is the what is really the difference between a consent manager and a consent management system. If I am a fiduciary, do I really need to deploy a consent manager? Should I just build a consent management system or buy one? If you could help sort of demystify this, it will really help. I think we continue to keep getting sort of questions around this, and I'd love to chime in as well after you finished.
Yeah, so I don't know why this question is coming up, but the reality is it is coming up, right? In fact, I was responding to similar questions today in the morning as to what the difference is between a consent manager and a consent management solution or a system. Let's say, let's call consent manager a third party, right? A consent manager is an individual or an entity who's responsible for overseeing how organizations are obtaining, storing, tracking, managing user consent regarding the processing of a data principal's personal data. They are supposed to provide a transparent and an interoperable platform to data principals to provide to manage, review, or withdraw their consent before any personal data is processed. This is an entirely new entity or group of entities that is going to be formed with the advent of the DPDP. They are going to be registered with Data Protection Board. They are going to be data fiduciaries on their own, but data fiduciaries are for data fiduciaries like us, or some of the other organizations that process personal data today. Consent manager will be third parties who will be providing services to you and to the data principals, right? To manage consent, everything from providing consent, withdrawing consent, managing, reviewing, everything, right? For an organization, within an organization, there needs to be a consent management system or a solution that needs to be there in the organization to manage consent for their customers, right? I'll take an example, right? You have consent. Let's say you take a consent to run a marketing campaign for sending out emails, right? We are sending a promotion email to the data principal. We'll need consent for it. Now that consent needs to be obtained. If it is obtained through a website that the organization uses, all the notices are provided, consent is obtained, okay, we are good to go to conduct this marketing activity. This consent needs to be stored, needs to be obtained, stored, processed in order for this marketing campaign to be conducted, right? The other thing is, if the consent is revoked, that marketing activity cannot happen. Or if the customer rejects the consent or rejects the conducting of this marketing activity, then it cannot be done, right? So basically, this consent management solution is internal to an organization as to how consent is being managed within their own organization, and how this consent impacts downstream activities like marketing, right? Or any other activities for that matter. Now, how that consent is managed can be done through several platforms like the IDfy. You could implement such solutions within your organization to manage these processes, consent processing processes, right? Um, that creates an end-to-end consent management life cycle within the organization. Consent manager, the third party, is going to provide you some inputs as to, okay, this data principal has given you consent to uh, process their data. Now that could be for a fee, that could be free, I don't know, right? So consent manager is a third party, and you'll need to treat it as such.
Thank you, Francis. I think it's been sort of
Just yeah.
demystified to a large extent. Sarita, if you want to add a few.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, primarily when we flow down, Nikhil initiated the, concept of collection. Okay, let's to make it more simple. So consent manager is your that collection point where, the choices of our data principles and everything would be collected. And then the entire governance system would be there where we are, further mapping it with the purpose and, across we are sharing whether there is a valid consent or not. So and the enforcement and the withdrawals, the entire life cycle management has been done in the consent governance system.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a perfect use case of something that operates like a consent manager can be the CKYC, right? You have a CKYC number. You've already done a KYC with a bank. Now you want to open up another account with another bank. You share that CKYC number. It's done, right? So it's providing those services to the data principal so that they don't have to share those documents again with another bank. Just
Yeah.
an example that you can look at.
Got it. Yeah, I think just to summarize, obviously the consent manager entity is subservient to the data principal, whereas the consent management system could be either in-house or through a technology service provider, subservient or rather serving the fiduciary meet their obligations of the DPDP Act. Consent management systems actually extrapolate beyond being pure play consent entities because they sort of need to link back into, like you rightly said, the way that you look at third party risk. If data is going to let's say a marketing automation system, can they sort of consume that artifact and ensure that action is happening only appropriately? Similarly, when a DPRM sort of request comes through, the consent system then interfaces with what data you might have discovered to then ensure that appropriate deletion also occurs, right? So the differences I think, have sort of come through. We will now, I think, in the interest of time, just move on to our last segment, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So one sort of similar question for both of you before we do question answer. Um, and this is something which is close to sort of my heart, and I think we personally have embarked on a bunch of research that we are doing around this, soon to be published. Uh, at times as DPOs, obviously, like you, I think, Francis, you were alluding to this earlier, to say, as you try to get sort of CXO buy-in to be able to release budgets, sort of bless a program like this, at times when we continue to paint this compliance story, the narrative becomes, hey, this is the cost of compliance, and therefore, can you manage with XYZ, yeah, a number which is much lower than what you might have requested, right? But at least to me, having sort of engaged with this over the last 3.5 years, I personally do feel that there is real value and sort of some things that the enterprise could really get out of, right? By embarking on this journey. And I have a point of view. But before I get to that, I'd like to get to know both you, Francis and Sarita's, your points of view on, is there really true value on embarking on a sort of a privacy transformation journey on the back of DPDPA? And if yes, what is this? Is it tangible? Can somebody calculate it? How do we really think about this? Yeah.
Sarita, please go ahead.
Well, I was thinking, Francis, that this should come up from you first, being a DPO. You know, that is more of your interest. Then definitely, yeah. Go ahead.
Sure. So, Nikhil, it's not easy to convince people of for investing in these programs, right? The government has helped with such heavy fines,
Yes.
and that's kind of one part of what you can include if you want to present an ROI or a case for this program to be implemented in organizations, right? Avoid fines, right? More than avoiding fines, right? There is a reputational risk, right? People, organizations don't want to be in the limelight for the wrong reasons, right? It damages their reputation, their market. Consumers, customers may distrust the organization and avoid availing services from such organizations. The trust, building that trust may bring back customers again, for variety of services that they could avail. So bringing back customers, right, is an ROI. Talking about basic principles like data minimization, do not take more data than what you actually require, may reduce the need for storage space, right? And it is not always tangible, right? Because you can't put a cost to it just yet, right? You have to make sure that those practices are in place today, and calculate the ROI based on what it is going to look like tomorrow, right? So that can be very difficult. What it also does is with the with some of the compliances, like not compliances or support requirements like ROPA or records of processing activities. With these documents and the data flow maps being available, um, audits may take less time as compared to what it does today, right? So the efforts reduces, right? We don't have to haphazardly manage privacy incidents, right? We know where to look for data. We know where the data is. We know, okay, there is a committee who will manage these incidents if it happens. We have processes in place. So all these compliances lead to a smooth functioning when there is a crisis, and when there is no crisis at all, right? Prepare for such crisis beforehand. See, the data breach is going to happen, right? We have to be, you know, we have to make sure that we understand that there is always going to be breaches, right? If the breaches happen, we have to be prepared, and that's largely a few things that we can use to get budget, present ROI. There could also be other matrices like grievances coming down, or fewer data principal requests. That shows the trust in the organization, and less time consumed in addressing those challenges.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'll just quickly add considering the time frame. But what I want to emphasize on, it's more from the journey, from getting compliant, towards earning the trust. Because Francis has talked about it, that we are gonna earn is the customer trust. I'm not sure. If there is a very old report I remember when the GDPR came. Okay, so then Salesforce, like organization, they came ahead and saying that, okay, see, after getting the compliance, we have reported real faster enterprises sales. Okay, because we are actually gathered that confidence from our customer, and we have seen that results. Okay, so that's nothing but the conversion of this client's trust to the higher revenue. Okay, so this is the real ROI that we can talk about, and people, it can be in both tangible and intangible form, but this is one critical aspect that we are looking for. Data used to exist, people used to collect, but when you add the privacy assurance around it, so that definitely it's all about their gathering the partner's confidence, right, or your consumers' confidence towards your regulatory ready posture. This act, by bringing this act in our country, so this, assurance from a nationwide, from the government side and from the organization side towards the consumers, that has come up very effectively. Okay, that's one ROI definitely we should talk
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Sarita. Just to sort of summarize what both of you said, the way that I also see this is on the back of embarking on this journey, there's better sort of operational excellence. You will be able to respond to regulators faster, better. Your data footprints are going to get smaller, sharper. And on the back of that, if you actually run campaigns on consented data, you will be able to do better personalization if I really think about this, right? I was debating this with another DPO, and just looking at that requirement of presenting a notice to your existing customer base, right? A very interesting spin on this was, can I really use that as a lever to activate my dormant customer base, right, and bring them back onto my platform, right? I think that was a really, really insightful sort of conversation. I think there are a lot more avenues based on obviously what the obligations are versus what you'd like to use to sort of fuel better, sharper growth, not just in the long term, but even as you sort of build up through that journey, right? With that, I think we'll sort of conclude the Q&A that we had planned, but we'll open it up for questions in the audience. I will pick a few, and then I'd like to just point them to somebody. Otherwise, I am happy to pick a few as well, right? If we just go from the top, I think the first question that had come in is um, clarity on purpose-specific consent is what Avalokita is asking for. Will itemized consent under one privacy policy suffice, or will consent be required at each touch point for every single purpose? Is what she asks. Uh, Francis, Sarita, if either of you want to take this. I think the question is, can a catch-all consent work versus should I break this down by purpose? I think that's what I get, but happy to, if any, Francis, if you want to take a stab, and then
Yeah,
we'll.
the bundle consent, right? That's does not really work. Point in time consent may work.
Right.
If you have very few processes, a catch-all privacy notice may work, but it has to be customized. I cannot tell you, that a broad notice or a very lengthy privacy notice will work for every organization. You'll have to look at your organization's processes. If the number of processes are very high, running into hundreds or thousands, right, it may not work. You'll need to look at your processes, purposes. There's consent. The obtaining consent process needs to be purpose driven, and not necessarily saying that multiple consent frameworks or multiple consent uh, need to be obtained, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just my 2 cents on this is just being able to break it down, make it linked to purpose, and so
Correct.
think of this from a life cycle, right, of this customer. Think of this from life cycle of your regulations, because it's DPDP and other regulations. So those are three, four dimensions. If we architect it correctly, I think there is a way to sort of solve this. Like I said, just in time could be one mechanism, and you're sort of balancing both. Sort of, you don't want to bombard somebody with having 15 checkboxes and sort of
There's
having them
no
way,
there's
but there
no
is a way to solve this, and
there's no one answer to that
yeah.
question, right? It'll depend on the organization.
All right. I think we'll go to the next question. There is a interesting one to say, can somebody tell me what the qualification is to become a DPO? And uh, maybe Sarita, if you'd like to start, then we can go to.
Yeah, see, usually how the DPO we see in the industry right now, you see a lot of organizations like DSCI. They have taken a lot of initiatives. Okay, they have come up with a specific requirement of a DPO, and they have designed a DPO program for getting a certification, and just to brief them about their requirement. But what we are seeing, okay, if anybody who has the exposure towards the technology and the regulation from a global standpoint, okay, who understand the acts properly, who has worked from a global exposure is already there. From a privacy standpoint, they have the understanding of a data life cycle. Specifically, we all know, right, the organizations, many of why there are committees have been formed till the time the DPOs have been appointed. And if you look at the committee, so the committees are usually from the your HR, legal, and information security. Okay, these are the three verticals primarily who are coming together in order to form these committees, because they have the well exposure towards the data lifecycle, specifically the record management, the contractual obligations, how it has been formed. They have the fair understanding towards the regulations, okay, and the how the data protection has been done in the environment. Okay, those type of exposures, if you see. Other than that, if you want to look at a very strong profile of a DPO, you can look for the global recognized accreditation which are available. The IAPP is the organization which gives a lot of certifications, CIPP, CIPM. Those certification you can look for. ISO certifications are also available, like 27701. Okay, that is the individual level certification if they are lead auditor or lead implementer. So there are few fair understanding that we see, which is there. Okay, hope that answers.
No, I think obviously there are certifications in place, and I think there's a link here saying who internally can we nominate, or what are the kind of skill sets needed. And at least my sense, obviously based on interacting with, I would say about 200 plus DPOs or to be DPOs in this country, I think anybody who understands organizational nuances, somebody who can drive this change internally and understands both aspects of the legal side of adhering to a law like this, as well as is capable of sort of understanding technology, right? So those are the two sort of levers that I would look at. Obviously, yes, certifications help, and I am also certified with DSCI, just case in point. Yeah. I think
Just
one
in
last
case
maybe
anyone wants to have a DPO. So, Nikhil is okay.
I can tell you one
On a
thing.
lighter note,
If you're
yeah.
able to talk to Nikhil for 10 minutes on privacy, then you can become a DPO.
On a lighter note, all of you. Yeah.
No, I think we are at top of the hour, but if we can take one last question and then we can close. I just have to pick the right one, which is mm, yeah, I think this is an interesting one. This is Shri Priya, who says if we have to comply with multiple regulations like GDPR, DPDPA, a common data privacy framework is potentially needed, right? Since retention periods might be different for different requirements. So if one of you wants to take this, otherwise I can start and then maybe you guys can add on. In the way that I truly look at let's say even retention, right, for that matter, and let's take a BFSI, RBI sort of regulated entity, right? Let's say you collected somebody's PII data, this is phone number, KYC documents, etc., and they come back to you and they say, "Hey, can you go ahead and delete my data? My account relationship is now getting over with you." Uh, if I had to place myself in the fiduciary's sort of shoes, I would have to do three things, right? Number one, I would have to obviously make this available through an appropriate mechanism so that they can exercise this right. Two, I may need to do certain deletions which are purpose specific, right? For example, that same phone number for marketing or some of my internal statutory sort of requirements, they need to be deleted, not just at my end, but at the third party or processor's end, right? So that's step sort of two. And then step three is really, I may not actually delete all of these instances of that data, right? RBI rule of account-based relationships will supersede, and the entity may need to archive this data for even 7 years beyond that relationship. So that, in my sense, sort of answers the question that is being asked, to say DPDP obviously needs to be looked at not in a silo, but look at it from other dimensions, because the retention period will be different for different sort of regulations that are coming through, and therefore holistically solving for this. is possible. Obviously, technology could help in that matter. If there's any other thoughts, we could use that as closing notes.
Yeah. Just a quick thought. Like all these regulations, they have to, look up to as a subset of a GAPP. Okay, the principle-based privacy framework that if you all have heard about. So these are based on this 10 core principle of the privacy. So if you read all this regulation, they all are talking about purpose limitation, data minimization, storage limitation, security safeguard, about the access rights, data subject access right, or the data principal rights, okay, the transparency. So all these are around those 10 core principles. Okay, so definitely one, if your organization need to cater to lot many regulation, having a broad level framework addressing to a specific SOP level, requirements that supersedes all the requirements. That's how we have to plan the organizational journey.
Yep. All right, then. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarita. Thank you, Francis, for joining
Thank
us. We
you so
hope that
much.
this was useful for the participants. I believe there's a feedback form that would also have come through. I do know that we did not manage to answer some more questions that have come our way. Be rest assured, we will compile and send this out to all attendees along with the recording. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope you found this useful. Look forward to seeing you all again.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nikhil. Thanks, Francis.